Our jurors and alternates have returned, and for the record, all of our jurors and alternates have chosen to return to the jury box. Very grateful for that. Do get used to it. I'm grateful to have you there. Mr. Robert Durst is present with his lawyers, Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chesnoff, Mr. Ray, and Mr. Lewis and back too. I got you, Mr. Ray. Then we have Mr. Lewin Bailey and Miata Henderson and Milius. Our witness, Mr. Douglas Durst, has resumed the witness stand. I'll remind you that you are under oath. You may continue your examination of the witness, Mr. Lewin.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Durst, right before the break, I had told you that I wanted to talk about the week after Kathy Durst's alleged disappearance, and I'm going to start with Monday, February 1st, 1982. Do you remember seeing your brother Bob on that Monday?
No, I do not.
Did Bob ever tell you where he was on Monday, February 1st, 1982?
No, he did not.
Do you remember previously telling investigators in this case during your 2015 interview on April 15, 2015, that Bob had told you that he was out in the city on Monday? Do you recall saying that?
I believe he told me he was out of the city.
Okay, so my question is, so if you can, forgetting about what you have said or have not said as you sit here, do you have a memory of Bob telling you anything about where he was that day?
I remember him telling me he was not in the city.
I want to ask you about Tuesday, February 2nd. Do you recall if Bob was at the office that day?
No, he was not.
And do you have a specific memory as to why he was not? In other words, why you remember he was not at the office?
We were supposed to have a closing that day on a property we were buying, and it was postponed.
And I'm having, maybe the jury can hear, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you.
All right.
That's better. That's better. When you say a closing, can you explain what you mean by that?
We were purchasing a property in Manhattan.
And was it standard for Bob to have attended that closing?
Yes.
And is it your testimony that you then have a specific memory that he did not make that closing that day, which was unusual?
And now, recollecting that it was not actually a closing, we needed Bob's signature on a document, and he was unavailable to sign the document. The closing was either later in the week or the following week.
And in terms of the idea that Bob Durst, whether it was the day of the closing or that you needed him to sign something, do you have a clear memory that you needed Bob for something and he wasn't there?
That is correct, yes.
I want to talk about Wednesday, February 3rd. Do you remember if you saw Bob that day?
I remember I did not see him that day.
And do you remember, in the 1980s, did the Durst family typically have informal board meetings on Wednesdays for individuals who were working at the Durst organization who were also board members?
Yes, a family meeting would be a better way of expressing it.
And when you say family meeting, can you explain what you mean by that?
The members of the family who were working in the business would sit down and discuss issues of the day.
And do you remember, to the best of your memory, was there a board meeting on Wednesday, February 3rd?
I don't have any actual recollection of it, no.
Were the meetings traditionally every Wednesday?
They were every Wednesday, yes.
And do you remember Bob specifically seeing him at such a meeting on February 3rd?
I know he wasn't in the office, so I could not have seen him at the meeting.
Do you remember anything about Thursday, February 4th, 1982?
I remember that was the day that it became public that Kathy was missing.
And what about Friday, February 5th, 1982? Do you remember anything about that date?
It was in all the papers.
I want to ask you, are you aware that your brother has previously said that on Tuesday, February 2nd, 1982, he was in Connecticut, quote, scouting, unquote, for property to buy for the Durst organization? Have you ever heard that before?
I have heard it, yes.
And can you tell me, would such scouting for property, would that have been a part of your brother's portfolio or job responsibilities?
No, it would not have been.
And can you explain, did your family, did the Durst organization, did they scout for property in Connecticut at that time?
No, we were actively building a building, and we were not looking to acquire additional property.
And let me ask you something. If you were looking for additional properties, would that have been your brother Bob's job to find them?
No.
And did your father at the time have a saying about real estate that he was interested in purchasing?
My father was frequently quoted as saying he wouldn't buy anything he could not walk to. And I always said, well, I was glad he lived in Midtown.
And Connecticut was not walking distance, is that
No,
correct?
no.
Back in 1982, do you remember, was the main number for Van Dorn Realty 212-586 3131? Thank you.
Yes, that was the main number.
Thank you, Mr. DeGuerin. I want to show you what has been previously marked as People's 72. I'm going to put up, this is
25.
page 25. And in a moment, I'm going to have that up there, but for a moment, when you and Bob Durst were working for Van Dorn Realty in the early 80s, are you aware of whether your brother Bob would call the office collect?
Yes, he would always call collect.
And how do you know that?
I just know it, I don't know. I know that he would always call the office collect.
And was your brother known at the Durst organization for, no matter where he was and how cheap the call or how close, that if he was going to call the Durst organization, it would be collect?
Yes.
And at the time, did you yourself place occasional collect calls to Van Dorn Realty?
I would occasionally have to call collect because I had a calling card, a corporate calling card, but Bob would like to cancel it for me.
Was anybody else at Van Dorn Realty allowed to call the office collect such that their calls would be accepted?
I would have to believe that my father or uncles could, but I never heard they did.
And so it would be Durst family members only, is that correct?
That's correct.
And at the time, in terms of Van Dorn Realty, were your father and your uncles working for Van Dorn?
No, they were partners in the business.
In terms of actual people who were working for Van Dorn, who were family members, that was you and your brother, is that correct?
That's correct.
I want to ask you, if there was a collect call in Van Dorn phone records from that time period, do you have an opinion as to who could have made that call?
Only Bob or I.
Objection, speculation.
Your Honor, I believe the foundation's been met.
Just one moment. Who collectively, who was entitled to make such calls?
Yes.
With that understanding overruled. Not identifying the particular caller, but the
Yes,
group of
correct.
possible callers.
Yes.
Yes. You may answer.
I'm sorry. Question again?
Sure. So, at that time, if there was a collect call in that, in phone records from that time period, is it safe to say that such a call, if it were accepted, could only have been made by you or your brother?
That is correct, yes.
Any question in your mind?
No.
Clarification, there's some record on the screen, but I don't think it's been identified as an
It's
exhibit.
I think he's about to.
Yeah, I'm getting there right now. I want you to look at the records that are on the screen. And do you see at the top the 5/8? Oh, and you should be able to see it on your, is it not on there?
That's blank.
Hold on, I'll zoom. May I approach?
Yes, I guess I have a control here for that.
At the top, in the top left corner, there's a number, 586.
I see, in that, some folks would like to look at it on that screen also, can you do that?
Oh, good, we can see movies.
I'm afraid we will.
And if it's easier for you, Mr. Durst, it's also straight ahead. I don't know what's easier for you to look at. Do you see the number on the top left-hand corner, 586-3131?
Yes,
And that is the Van Doren Realty number at that time, is that right?
that is correct.
I want to ask you, there is a call on the left side under 202, February 2nd at 9:17 a.m. from Mount Kisco, New York. It's a collect call. Do you know anything about that call?
From Mount Kisco, that was a call I made on my way driving to the city. I had to have my tires repaired.
And when you were originally asked about this call, did you remember?
No, I did not remember making.
And what was it that triggered your memory at a later point in time about this call?
I had completely forgotten the incident of having to get the tires fixed, and it just came back to me.
And so specifically on February 2nd, is that when you had the incident with your vehicle where you had to take it in?
Yes,
So does that mean then that call at 9:17, that was made by you?
yes,
I want to ask you about the call at 10:19 a.m. from what is abbreviated as Beach Haven, New Jersey, 11:56 a.m. Beach Haven, New Jersey, and 12:23 Beach Haven, New Jersey. And then finally at 4:55 p.m. Barnegat, New Jersey. Are those calls that you yourself made?
no, I did not make those calls.
To the best of your knowledge, have you ever been to any of those places?
No, I have not been.
Based on what you have testified to previously, if you did not make those calls, given the habit and customs within Van Doren Realty at the time, do you have an opinion as to who would have had to have made those calls for them to be accepted?
Speculation.
Overruled.
They were made by Bob.
I want to ask you if you are aware that, and you can take those down now, Mr. Balian.
For the record, can we have that document identified?
We did.
We did.
72. Page 25.
Page 25.
I didn't see it on the document. Is it marked?
72. Yes, Mark, right here. 72.
It's part of the stipulation.
I understand.
But display it to council before you project it, please.
Yes.
Are you aware, Mr. Durst,
72 right here. Okay.
are you aware, Mr. Durst, that your brother Bob has stated previously that he called the Durst organization from Connecticut on that Tuesday?
I have been told that, yes.
And you had a chance to take a look at the records that we just showed you. Would you agree there was no collect call from Connecticut to Van Doren Realty on that
Yes,
date?
I would agree.
And let me ask you something. If your brother had called the office from Connecticut, given his habit and custom, if I were to ask you on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being, I have no idea how he would have placed that call, and 100 being he would have absolutely placed that call collect, what would your answer be?
Answer would be 100.
I want to talk about now, after Kathy disappeared, do you remember, based on your observations, what kind of efforts Bob appeared to be making to try to find his allegedly missing wife?
The only effort I was aware of was the offer of a reward for her somebody found her or returned her.
Did he ever come to you and request any help finding her?
No, he did not.
At the time, is it fair to say that your family had significant resources and connections?
Yes,
Are you aware of Mr. Durst ever coming to you or any member of your family saying, you know what, we need to use every resource we have to try to find her?
I have no awareness of that.
Do you know who Nick Scappetta was?
Yes, I know who he was.
And is it fair to say he was a criminal defense attorney who was representing Bob in 1982?
Yes.
Did you have any part in hiring him?
No, I did not.
Do you have any personal knowledge of any discussions between your brother and Mr. Scappetta?
I do not.
Are you aware that your brother has repeatedly stated that you and your father were present for numerous meetings involving your brother Bob and his attorney, Mr. Scappetta, relating to Kathy's disappearance? Are you aware of those allegations?
I am aware of those allegations.
Did you ever attend any such meeting?
No, I did not.
Are you aware of your father ever having attended any such
I'm not
meeting?
aware of my father attending any of those meetings.
At the time in 1982, is it fair to say that you and your father had experience dealing with attorneys?
Oh, yes.
Is it fair to say that you and your father understood the concept of attorney-client privilege?
Very well.
Knowing your father, do you believe that he would have jeopardized attorney-client privilege by attending a meeting with Bob and his attorney?
Excuse me, that really is speculation.
So, I'm gonna sustain the objection, but just say objection's speculation.
All right.
I'll sustain it.
Was your dad an experienced businessman?
Very experienced.
Was your dad an experienced individual dealing with attorneys and litigation?
Very experienced in dealing with litigation and attorneys.
And in terms of your family's dealings, did you have attorneys at that time who were literally on beck and call to the Durst organization?
Yes.
And was it frequent for you and your father, pursuant to your dealings in business, to rely on conversations with attorneys?
Yes.
And to the best of your knowledge, did you yourself understand the issue of attorney-client privilege?
Yes, I understand it very well.
Did you understand at that time that if an attorney was discussing something with a client in front of a third party, that that would very likely waive attorney-client privilege?
Yes, I did understand it.
And to the best of your knowledge, did your father have even more experience than you did?
He did.
And based on your knowledge and understanding of your father, is that something that he understood as well?
Based on my knowledge of him, yes, that is something he understood very well.
Knowing your father and given that background, do you believe that he would have jeopardized such a privilege by attending such a meeting with Bob Durst and his attorney?
Same question, objection,
Sustain.
Your Honor, can I just ask the grounds, because I'm not sure
You
what I
said
can...
speculation.
May we approach briefly, Your Honor?
Yes, Mr. Lewin, let's approach to discuss.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Lewin, next question.
Mr. Durst, in the days after Kathy's disappearance, were you contacted by either her friends or family members asking for access to Bob and Kathy's South Salem cottage?
Yes, I received a call from...
Let me just stop. So the question is just, this is a yes or a no question?
Yes, I did.
And let me ask you, in response to that, did you agree to let these individuals in to Bob and Kathy's house?
Yes, I did.
And how did you end up letting them into the house?
I broke into the house.
And how did you break into the house?
I forced a door to the house open.
And again, because of prior rulings, I would just make sure you're listening to me very carefully, so I'm going to lead you on this. Did you end up telling them that, in essence, you would let them into the house, you would give them a certain amount of time, but then you were going to have to report that there was a burglary?
Yes, that is correct.
And in fact, you would agree there was no burglary because you were letting them in.
Yes, after I broke into the house, but yes.
And at the time that you did this, what was your motivation for assisting in this way?
They were quite desperate, and I wanted to either show them that nothing had happened or there was evidence that something did happen.
And did you actually end up falsely reporting to the New York State Police that a burglary had occurred?
Yes, I did.
And subsequent to that, did the police come out? Did they actually take a report from you?
Yes, they did.
And is it fair to say that at the time, you were not truthful with the police regarding what had occurred with respect to this alleged burglary?
That is correct.
Were you concerned at the time that your brother Bob would find out that you were cooperating with Kathy's friends and family and the police regarding the investigation?
Yes,
I'm allowing it.
yes, I was concerned.
And why were you concerned?
Because my brother, when he gets angry, he gets extremely angry.
I want to ask you, at some point, did you and your brother's issues, your personal issues, did it spill into your dealings at work?
Yes, it became very contentious.
And can you describe what happened?
Well, we had many arguments, and but you know, in the
Objection overly broad.
Can you describe what happened overly broad?
me too.
So, why don't you might need to lead a little bit? Go
Sure,
ahead, you may lead
sure.
the witness.
Did you end up putting a camera in your office?
Yes, I did,
What was the purpose of that?
because I had evidence that Bob was entering my office, going through my papers, and somebody had urinated into my waste paper basket.
And were you able to confirm some of these suspicions with the camera?
I was able to confirm that Bob was entering my office.
And at that time, were you physically afraid of your brother?
My brother kept a large,
Excuse me, I object, not relevant.
Wait,
And
this,
Oh, wait, hold on a second, hold on. So objection's irrelevant. What's your other objection?
it's, it called for a yes or no, but it's not relevant.
All right, so were you, I'll overrule the relevance. Listen to the question. It does call for a yes or no, so I answer only the question.
It's improper character evidence.
Overruled, so it's not admitted for that purpose. I'll hear what the answer is, but I'll limit it.
were you afraid of your brother?
yes, I was.
Why were you afraid of your brother?
My brother kept a very large wrench with a sharp point on his desk, which could be considered a weapon.
And at that time, in response, did you yourself secure a weapon as well?
I secured something I thought would defend me against any attack, but not a weapon.
So ladies and gentlemen, I'm receiving this for a limited purpose. This is not to judge Mr. Robert Durst's character. This is admitted for the credibility of this witness to understand better understand his testimony and judge his credibility. So you may continue.
And I want to be clear, your brother at no point threatened you with a weapon or tried to attack you
No,
with
at
a
no
weapon?
point did he threaten me with a weapon.
You indicated that your brother ended up leaving the Durst organization after you were named the trustee, for lack of a better term. I've yet again forgotten what preeminent trustee. Thanks again, Mr. Chesnoff. After you were named the preeminent trustee, did he leave immediately?
No, he did not.
And do you remember specifically how you found out that he had left?
We would have lunch at a restaurant, and we were all headed to the restaurant, and he never showed up. The family.
The family. So this was not a social event with you and Bob. This was the family.
Family, yes.
So one day he just doesn't show up.
Yes.
And did you find out that your brother had been making preparations to leave for a while?
Yes, I did find that out.
And what did you find out?
I was contacted by the post office that he, months earlier, had submitted a form to have his mail sent to a business address, which included our business mail. And I also found out that he had signed a lease for an office, for his own office downtown.
And was there anybody, to the best of your knowledge, within the Durst organization who was aware in advance that he was leaving?
No, there was no one who was aware.
To your knowledge, were there any family members that were aware in advance that he was leaving?
To my knowledge, there were no family members that were aware.
I want to ask you, when I say the name Susan Berman, is that a name that you know?
I know the name Susan Berman.
Did you ever meet her?
I met her once or twice.
Were you aware of the extent or closeness of Bob's relationship with her?
I was, yes.
And what were you aware of?
That Bob was frequently with her, spoke about her frequently. But
Do you remember at the time that Kathy disappeared, that Susan stepped up and was making statements to the press?
yes, I was aware of that.
Was that something, to your knowledge, that was coordinated through the Durst organization, or was that something independent with she and Bob?
That was independent, had nothing to do with the Durst organization.
How did you find out years later that Susan had been murdered?
I heard it over the news or read it in the paper. I don't remember which one, but
Have you ever spoken to your brother Bob about any issues relating to her death?
no, I have not.
Sometime in 1999 or 2000, did you find out that there was a reinvestigation into Kathy's death?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember, to the best of your memory, how you found out?
I believe I was told by a retired PR agent who still consulted with us that he had been told by his sources at the paper that there was a reinvestigation.
And was that the famous Mortimer Morty
Yes,
Matz,
The very famous Morty Matz, yes.
who is still living, is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. Matz is near 100 right now?
He is.
And did he previously have a position where he did public relations for the Durst organization?
He still is employed by the Durst organization.
Do you remember if you ever spoke to Bob about the reinvestigation?
I believe there was a meeting with my sister and I that was discussed, yes.
Do you remember what Bob's response was?
He got very upset.
Did he in any way respond with such feelings as, oh my gosh, now maybe they can find out what happened to my missing wife?
No,
Were you and your brother still in contact when Morris Black was killed in 2001?
I had seen him, as I said, a week or two before. My
At the
brother.
wedding?
At the wedding.
But you had no contact, you
I
didn't
had
speak
no
at the wedding?
contact, no.
Did you ever speak with your brother about the case?
No,
Did you attend any of the trial?
no.
Now, at some point after Morris Black's death and after the trial, did you and your brother become involved in the Durst organization, your family, in a contested legal dispute over the assets of the trust and Bob's share of them?
Yes,
And is it fair to say that this would highly acrimonious be an exaggeration?
it would not be an exaggeration.
Would it potentially be an understatement?
Yes,
And as a result of this litigation, was there eventually a settlement where your brother Bob was paid tens of millions of dollars and basically bought out of any of the family business, any of the trusts?
that is correct.
When approximately did this occur?
2006.
Has your brother made it clear in his actions, things he said, things you have heard, that he holds animosity towards you as a result of that settlement?
Leading.
What was the objection?
I'll allow it, I'll allow it. It's leading, I'll allow it.
Yes, I've heard things that have been said that lead me to believe he's not happy with the settlement.
And has he made clear that he still harbors deep feelings of anger towards you?
Leading.
Sustain.
Has your brother,
Ask him how it.
well, in
feelings.
things you've listened to, dealings you've had, statements you've been made aware of, has your brother indicated how he feels about you to this day?
Yes,
And what are those feelings?
he'd like to murder me.
And are you aware of your brother, in fact, making calls from Pennsylvania discussing that very subject?
I am aware of that, yes.
Did you take those, and this is a yes or no question, do you take those threats seriously?
Yes, I did.
I want you to listen very carefully to this next set of questions. Again, I'm going to lead you, so I want you to only answer yes or no unless I end up asking for more of an explanation. Do you understand that?
I do understand.
After Bob jumped bail in Galveston and was on the run from authorities, did you become aware that he had shown up at your home in Katona?
Hearsay, calls for hearsay.
Okay.
Your Honor, just so we know, we've litigated
Yeah,
this,
I know,
and I'm trying to
yeah.
lead.
Let's sidebar again. All right, back in session. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fascinating and intricate legal issue that I want to explore to its full extent with these lawyers. And that means that we'll take 5 minutes now and 15 minutes after lunch. I'll have to come back after a nice long lunch at 1:45. 1:45. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. Mr. Durst, do not discuss your testimony with any other witness. And you'll be excused as soon as the jurors step out until 1:45. Leaving. So we have objections on relevance and on hearsay. And the bases for admission of the evidence of this efforts to kill or steps toward or intention of Robert Durst to kill his brother would be, first, would, to the extent that Douglas Durst knows about it, it would engender some fear which might affect his testimony, and to some extent that's admissible to show the credibility of this witness. However, of course, there is some danger, would there be too much of this disproportionate to the credibility issue, that it would be more prejudicial than probative. The people offer a second basis, and that is something that we already litigated. That's the relevance of this evidence to show an intent that towards persons who might supply evidence towards his criminal prosecution. There's a similar situation with Gilberto Najami. There were notes indicating plans or intentions towards Douglas Durst and Ms. Najami. These questions went to jumping bail and heading to Pennsylvania, and I was aware we litigated this. There is a secondary problem, and that is that this specific instance does call for some hearsay, ultimately would call for hearsay. The foundation for his belief would be based on something someone told him, and then when that particular conversation, that's not the hearsay. The hearsay is when, what did the gardener tell you? That would tend to call for hearsay. So, yes,
quickly.
Mr. Lund, please
Sure, Your
explain
Honor.
your position so that we can appropriately limit this inquiry.
Understood. So number one, Your Honor, the gardener, we certainly could have called, and if the defense wants, we'll call him and he can come in and he can testify to exactly what he observed. His observations, which the defense has, are far more prejudicial than 3 leading questions that I was going to ask. That's number one. Number two, Mr. Durst himself, in the 2001 jail calls, which the court has listened to, admits this incident, admits that he went over to Douglas's, and in fact, the idea is going to be that he talks about Igoring BM, who we can identify as Douglas. The court already admitted that information. The people's offer of proof was that, number one, he compares the way that he was feeling about Douglas to the way he felt about Kathy, and we are arguing that he killed Kathy. In addition, during that conversation that was recorded, Mr. Durst ends up acknowledging that in fact he had gone over to Douglas's, and when the person that he is speaking to, Mr. Durst says in essence, you know what, I don't think he knew what I was up to. And the other person says, oh, I think if I knew what you were up to, I think he definitely knew what you were up to. And Mr. Durst responds, oh, quote, he don't know me like that. He might know me like that now, but he didn't really know. And when you listen to the call, it's very clear that what Mr. Durst is saying is that he went over there with the intention to harm Douglas. So now what they appear to be objecting to is they're saying, hey, listen, you have a hearsay problem. We want you to bring in the gardener who made the observations. Be careful what you ask for, because we're more than happy to bring him in here and have him go through point by point. We did in conjunction and because of the court's rulings, I led him with three simple, innocuous questions. I want to also add, we're also going to get to the 2008 incident. This is the 2008 incident. On May 17, 2008, this is from the motion the court granted. Paul Ranganese, a security guard for Douglas Durst, saw a defendant drive into the driveway of Douglas's Katona, New York residence. Ranganese saw a defendant wearing a blue ski mask with eye openings pulled back into his forehead. This is not wintertime. Ranganese approached defendant and pulled his firearm while directing defendant to stop. Defendant did not immediately comply. When Ranganese was alongside the defendant's vehicle, defendant accelerated in reverse and drove forward at a high rate of speed away from Douglas's residence. So the problem, the issue that we have is that very clearly, number one, Mr. Durst has admitted to, in essence, plotting to kill his brother Douglas. He has compared the way that he feels about Douglas to the way he felt about Kathy, and our argument and position is that is what he did, that he killed her.
So it is 12:02. You've already described some of this to the court. The court already ruled that this was relevant, but now we're presented with a hearsay objection and a new 352 argument. I hear that 352 argument, but I do think this is certainly a probative evidence, and maybe the jury should hear from those witnesses, or perhaps it's pretty disturbing material, I think, but it's relevant. So maybe you'll reach an agreement, but it's 12:02. We're going to come back at 1:30, and the defense can weigh whether or not allow. And I directed Mr. Lewin to lead during a part of that for the purpose of avoiding anything inadmissible. These accusations of thefts that I excluded under 1101. I didn't think that was necessary, and I think Mr. Lewin did a good job steering away from the prejudicial and inadmissible material. I think he was trying to do the same thing here, but of course the mention of it is inescapably prejudicial. Question is whether it's more prejudicial, substantially more prejudicial than probative. So far I don't see that. So, but I'll let you work it out, and I'll also hear you. I haven't heard your argument. I heard you in chambers. You can reiterate your argument, or you can change course. That's fine. Either way, I'll see you at 1:30. Okay, we're in recess.
We're going to talk over the last one.